Oh, hello there. Joshua Witsaman from the Simpatico Podcast. Today I'll be starting a series that I'm calling Reviews Nobody Asked For. The title seems pretty self-explanatory. I'll be discussing movies and television series that I have a lot of thoughts about and which coincidentally almost no one else seems to care about. First subject I want to dive into is
Return to the Planet of the Apes.
The 1975 animated spin-off of the Planet of the Apes film franchise.
We made it, but where? Urko is bringing humanoid captives.
They're apes! You're crazy! It spoke.
Why are you doing this? Helping me to escape.
I'll get the beasts and make them pay no matter what it takes.
The return to the Planet of the Apes is the last dying breath of the original Apes productions. Just in case you are watching this and happen to know nothing about the Planet of the Apes, let's recap. The first Planet of the Apes movie came out in 1968 and was loosely based on the 1963 novel of the same title by Pierre Boulle. 1970 brought about the first sequel to the franchise, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which introduced a race of underground telepathic mutants who, at the end of the film, seemingly blew up the planet, ending the franchise forever. Then, in quick succession, the series saw 3 more sequels in as many years. 1971's Escape from the Planet of the Apes, 1972's Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and 1973's Battle for the Planet of the Apes. 1974 saw the beginning and ending of the short-lived live-action Planet of the Apes television series, starring Roddy McDowall, James Naughton, and Ron Harper. But in 1975, someone at 20th Century Fox was apparently still eager to capitalize on the apes and decided to venture into the realm of Saturday morning cartoons. But as it turned out, the studio was not eager to devote a large budget to such a production. While the backgrounds and art design of Return to the Planet of the Apes are impressive, the animation itself is lacking. In fact, if I'm being honest, the show isn't actually very animated at all. The majority of the animation seems limited to basic mouth movements, panning shots, and reusable running animations. At times, the production even resorts to simply filming overlays being manually pulled across a background, as in the case with this sequence. Whenever a sequence is granted any more animation than that, it does give a hint of excitement which, if sustained, could have made the series so much better. But because the show's creators preferred this minimalistic approach, presumably to keep the budget low, means that Return to the Planet of the Apes often feels like reading a comic book. But just because this animated series is not very animated, doesn't mean that the show has nothing to offer the Planet of the Apes fandom. In fact, I would argue quite the opposite. This version of the Planet of the Apes is a completely new universe, with new challenges and new enemies to face along the way, providing storylines which are not simply retelling major plot points from the movies. Scholars of the original Planet of the Apes films will remember that all of those movies were connected by a unifying timeline and a cleverly retconned continuity. The timeline of the live-action TV show was a bit more confused. That show seems to start the series anew, with yet another pair of stranded astronauts, like so many others before them. However, vague hints to previous events are mentioned in that show, and with reused sets, costumes, and character names, it is more difficult to separate the live-action television series from the previous Planet of the Apes films. Return to the Planet of the Apes, however, is the first truly unique perspective among the vintage Apes media. In the original Pierre Boulle novel, the ape civilization discovered by the waylaid astronauts is a modern society, completely contemporary with that of 1963 Earth. The more primitive, simplified ape culture we see in the films was adopted to, once again, keep budgets low. But in the animated realm, the advanced ape society of the novels makes its return. The Ape City of the animated series is shown to be a modern metropolis with large buildings and sprawling boulevards. Ape civilians are seen driving cars and listening to the radio. Television cameras and crews broadcast the activities of the Ape High Council and the Senate. Familiar ape protagonists Zira and Cornelius are seen working in a laboratory setting filled with microscopes, Bunsen burners, and other familiar equipment. Return to the Planet of the Apes is a wonderful mix of the original concepts of the novel, together with the visual design elements which helped make the movies great. Even though familiar characters such as Zaius, Zira, and Cornelius are used in the animated show, they are completely rebooted here, experiencing these events for the first time. Another major difference between the films and the animated version is the addition of giant monsters. Yes, you heard that right. From spiders big enough to catch humans, to enormous sea creatures and mountain yetis, and even weird dragons. This version of the Planet of the Apes shows that there are far more dangerous things lurking around than simply intelligent apes. Although the reason for these enormous beasts is never really explained, we have to assume that it's radiation. Nuclear fallout from whatever disaster wiped out the previous human civilization and paved the way for the apes we know and love. Additionally, the introduction of these giant monsters to the world allows for more variety of conflicts throughout the show. They present new and exciting threats beyond the standard angry gorillas. One major drawback to the live-action television series was that each episode became pretty formulaic pretty quickly. Thankfully, with the help of these fantastic beasts, Return to the Planet of the Apes is able to avoid that sort of narrative monotony. In a lot of ways, this peculiar version of the franchise might actually be my personal favorite. My only major complaints are the aforementioned lackadaisical animation style and the occasional disinterested line delivery from some of the voice cast. The writing of this series, however, is the show's greatest strength. The storytelling and world building remain solid throughout the 13 episodes. Although I don't know much of the behind the scenes of this cartoon, it feels as if the script writers were producing episodes that sprang from a well-orchestrated writer's room. Now I know this might sound hyperbolic, but Return to the Planet of the Apes, in 1975, achieves a type of evolving story arc over the course of each episode, the likes of which I didn't think had been achieved until much later in television history with shows like Babylon 5 and The Sopranos, and certainly not in any children's animated television of the era. Although Return to the Planet of the Apes might not be the best cartoon ever made, it certainly was ahead of its time in terms of storytelling. Characters will disappear for several episodes under mysterious circumstances. Strange clues and bits of information will be mentioned in passing and left unexplained until farther down the line. Enemies might be temporarily thwarted, but not defeated, leaving them to crop up again in later episodes. And none of these elements are resolved until the plot dictates, and not the other way around. Throughout the show, the heroes gather different resources, ally themselves with others, and establish a base of operations, all of which then become part of the growing universe of the series. These elements not only change how the main characters react to the world around them, but it also changes the way that world's antagonists deal with them. Now, don't get me wrong. These episodes are not great, complex masterworks of the narrative structure. It is a kid's show, after all. And the audience is expected to suspend a hell of a lot of disbelief in order for these stories to be enjoyed. But when I first watched this show, I was surprised at the complexity and attention to detail the writers poured into the last-ditch effort of a long-running franchise. And maybe that reveals my own lack of knowledge regarding television of the 60s and 70s. Maybe somewhere out there are serialized kid shows from those eras with burgeoning story arcs and progressive character development that would prove me wrong. If you know of any, please feel free to comment below. But as far as the Planet of the Apes goes, and the limited cartoons of the 70s that I know about, Return to the Planet of the Apes is a cut above. Now I could go on and on about the show, but I won't. You're welcome. Maybe at some point I'll do individual episode breakdowns or recaps or something like that, if there's any demand for it. But until that time, let's just go over some of the bullet points of the 13-episode run. I guess at this point I should give a spoiler warning. I'm going to be talking about a little bit of everything, and if you'd like to watch Return to the Planet of the Apes spoiler-free, I guess turn away now. There are, of course, several familiar Planet of the Apes tropes which are repeated here as well. The main characters of the animated series are once again astronauts who have accidentally been transported through time, arriving in a far-flung future version of Earth where they discover that the planet is now ruled by a society of intelligent apes. Nothing new there. The main human characters are Bill Hudson, white guy, Jeff Allen, black guy, and Judy Franklin, woman. Pretty standard fare for the time. Although it is never explicitly detailed what their roles were aboard their space capsule, I have my personal headcanon. Bill seems to have been the mission commander, as shown by his tendency to take the lead throughout their zany adventures. Jeff seems to have been the science officer or maybe chief engineer, evidenced by his use and familiarity with the few surviving pieces of technology which the astronauts are able to salvage from their crashed ship. Jeff is also seen directing the construction project for the humanoid fortifications. And side note, in the show, Jeff is voiced by Austin Stoker, who has a previous Planet of the Apes credit, playing another human named MacDonald in Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Judy appears to have been the pilot of their spacecraft. During the episode titled Screaming Wings, Bill and Jeff look to Judy to steal and subsequently fly an antique airplane, which the apes have managed to salvage. The airplane then returns throughout the storyline, and Judy is the only one who seems able to fly it. The main apes of the series are a mix of new and returning characters. The reluctant chimpanzee heroes Zira and Cornelius are back, freshly rebooted but displaying their characteristic mix of pacifist compassion, scientific curiosity, and cultural naivete.
Why are you doing this?
Doing what?
Helping me to escape, endangering yourselves.
We're not really sure, but I somehow feel that killing you is wrong.
Amongst the apes, Zira and Cornelius are the only real friends that the main characters have. Then we have General Urko, the new power-hungry and tyrannical gorilla of the animated series. He can only be described as the series' main antagonist. Urko continually goes out of his way to try and destroy all humans due to the existential threat of intelligent humans dominating the planet. And honestly, given the track record of the human race, who can blame him? Fun fact, Urko is voiced by Henry Corden, longtime voice actor for Fred Flintstone, so occasionally it sounds like Fred Flintstone is trying to wipe out humanity.
The expedition will be protected by my army. If we find the invaders or their spaceship, I guarantee there will be no trace of them left on the planet of the apes.
Fun. And of course, fan favorite Dr. Zaius makes a return as sometime ally and occasional enemy. The orangutan moral centrist who constantly tries to walk the line between gorilla genocidal fascism and chimpanzee rational enlightenment, all for the sake of maintaining his own power. Throughout the show, Dr. Zaius strategically avoids taking any significant action until he can be certain that doing so will sustain his status in the ape hierarchy.
My fellow citizens,
What could he?
shh, never have I seen a more disgraceful event than this.
Here.
General Urko's behavior today shows total incompetence to command.
Tell him, Dr. Zaius.
Perhaps the most dynamic characters in Return to the Planet of the Apes, however, are the cast of minor personalities who are introduced along the way and who continually pop up over the course of the show. Firstly, we have Krator, leader of the Underdwellers. This universe's version of the telepathic underground mutants introduced in Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Similarly to their film counterparts, the Underdwellers live beneath the Forbidden Zone amongst the remnants of the old Earth society. But in a new twist for the series, the Underdwellers are not only endowed with incredible telepathic and telekinetic powers, but they have created a highly advanced technological society underground, which surpasses even the modernity of the ape society of this era. The Underdwellers do, however, seem obsessed with prophecy and ritual, and initially come into conflict with the heroes of the show when they kidnap Judy, believing her to be a prophesized savior who will return the Underdwellers to the surface world. Eventually, the Underdwellers become allies and show up in several other episodes to aid the main cast. Next, we have the High Llama. The High Llama is an orangutan priest and leader of a mountainous community of apes who have separated themselves from the squabbling commotion of Ape City. The High Mountain Apes have their own culture, which revolves around the mysterious figure of Kygor. Little is shown about this society, but from what we discover about the High Llama, it seems the High Mountain Apes lead a very peaceful, zen existence among their elevated, snowy retreat. Kygor is a King Kong-style giant monster ape that resides in the icy mountain regions. Thankfully, the main characters of the series develop a good relationship with the apes of the high mountains, and thus are graced with the blessings of Kygor. The giant Yeti ape saves the lives of the protagonists twice during the course of the show, but is Kygor just another giant monster residing in this version of the apes mythos, or is there something more to this revered ice-loving Kong wannabe? Sadly, due to the limited run of the series, we may never know. Next, we have Ron Brent. Brent is an interesting character. First of all, his name is obviously an allusion to the main character from the first sequel in the franchise, but this Brent is a completely new and different person. Introduced relatively late in the series, Ronald Brent is yet another astronaut from the past. Brent is initially mentioned in the very first episode of the show, when the heroes find his military tags among the devolved humans that they encounter. There is no follow-up until nearly the end of the series, when the main characters find Brent living as a hermit beyond the Forbidden Zone. Excited to discover other talking humans, Brent joins the group, helping establish a base of operations and village for the primitive humans. Then we have Nova. Nova is one of the devolved humans living in the wilds. Once again, Nova's name is clearly a reference to the previous films, but again, this version of the character has a completely different origin. Partially raised by Brent after he is taken in by Nova's tribe, who adopt him after he crash lands. Nova has been taught a few rudimentary words by Brent and becomes a liaison of sorts between the heroes of the show and the other primitive humans of her tribe. Lastly, we have the Monster Bird. The Monster Bird is absolutely not a bird, but most definitely a monster. The characters only ever refer to this thing as a monster bird, but it's clearly a dragon or a dinosaur or something. Whatever it is, it's a crazy looking thing that makes terrible noises every time that it's on screen. The creature harasses ape and human alike over the course of several episodes, and is the most prominent example of the biggest contribution this show makes to the Planet of the Apes universe, the previously discussed giant monsters. All of the best Planet of the Apes material has some degree of social commentary embedded within its stories, starting with the original novel, on into the revolutionary conquest for the Planet of the Apes, and beyond. These stories have a message to share with the audience, and Return to the Planet of the Apes is no different. Although the political analysis of the animated series tends to be toned down, limited to moralistic lessons, the show does slip in a few bits of social commentary as well.
You're also a scientist, Cornelius, and right now the humanoids are a very endangered species. Without our aid, they could soon be extinct.
That would be terrible, wouldn't it?
You just can't stand by and let it happen.
Please help them.
In a matter this serious, do you expect the citizens to take the word of a politician or a general?
We have anticipated skeptics. Therefore, we have authorized full media coverage of the expedition.
Weapons!
Science.
The Senate has only so much money to give. In its wisdom, it will decide.
But Dr. Zayas, you have great influence in the Senate. We must have the money for research.
Research? Ha! We need arms! What borders does research protect?
It is the decision of the Council that General Urko be suspended from duty without pay for 3 months, and that he make a public apology to all peace-loving apes on national television. Power is something that must never, I repeat, never be misused.
And although the military apes of the series are shown carrying rifles, no guns are ever fired in the cartoon due to the regulations on children's television programming of the era. Overall, Return to the Planet of the Apes is a low-budget, short-run animated spin-off of a narratively exhausted franchise. Yet, defiantly, the series managed to produce a compelling and evolving storyline unlike anything else from that era. Although this 70s animated series wouldn't be called exciting by a modern general audience, anyone who considers themselves a fan of the Planet of the Apes owes it to themselves to seek it out, if for no other reason than to gain a new perspective on an old, familiar favorite.
Goodbye, Cornelius. Zira.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.